Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for Happiness is a Serious Business with the Friday Pulse CEO and founder Nic Marks. Nic is going to take us through the webinar now, and we'll have Q&A at the end, but I think Nic, you're open to questions as you go through as well if someone has something particular.
Yes, sorry, that the person who says did you start, it was me messing around with this with my button and getting it wrong. Hi everybody, I'm Nic Marks, CEO of Friday Pulse, and the webinar today is on this why happiness is a serious business. And sorry, just getting my buttons right. So what I'm going to talk about is how the soft stuff is actually the hard stuff, how I'm acutely aware that managing a team, leading a team is not the easiest thing, and I'll talk a little bit about the neuroscience behind that, but it's worth it. If you build a great team, everything goes better. So a bit about the business case, and then about measurement, but I'm going to use the illustration of the pandemic to show that the pandemic hurt and how measurement shows that in its terms, and then talk about how you can build happy teams and evidence that you can build happy teams. And then finally, there'll be some time for questions at the end. So I've got the chat open. So if you've got anything about clarification point as we go along, then please ping it in the chat and I'll try and draw my attention to that. And questions we'll take at the end, but if there's absolutely one about clarification, please just ask it as we go through. Thanks very much. So here we go. So the soft stuff. So first just a bit about me. I'm a statistician and I did a TED talk a bit ago. Very, very briefly, I did mathematics and then systems thinking and statistics at Cambridge and Lancaster. And then in the 90s, I started doing quality of life studies. I also trained as a psychotherapist then, which quite influences my work. It's probably why I end up being the guy doing data about people. And I founded what became the Centre for Wellbeing at the think tank, the New Economics Foundation, actually 2001. And we did quite a lot of, I would think, quite groundbreaking work on how you measure wellbeing at a population level. Used to advise the Blair and then Cameron's government how to measure wellbeing, advise, cajole, annoy probably. And then in 2010, I did my TED talk. I did a bit of time as a speaker. And then I founded this business, and Friday Pulse was launched actually 2019, but basically, that's what the 2020s is going to be about, is promoting this idea that we can create a tool that really helps us be better leaders and helps teams be happier and more successful. And that's really what Friday Pulse is about. So as I said, I'm going to start with what the soft stuff is, the hard stuff. So first thing to say really is that managing a team is not easy, it's difficult. And I really like this quote from the evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar. Our social world is by far the most complex thing in the universe, because it is so dynamic and in constant flux, which teams are dynamic in constant flux. Keeping track of it and managing it is very demanding in just purely information processing terms he's talking about. It's the most demanding thing that we do. And in fact, I was watching, I don't know if any of you have seen the BBC series, I think it's The Universe or The Planets with Brian Cox. And he was talking about how human civilization is the most complex thing in the universe. So relationships, teams are a network of relationships. This is not easy. This is why we have this large prefrontal cortex, in that we need this amount of processing power to manage the complexity of them. We are a very successful species because we are very relational, and teams are at work the way that relationships are really in play. So, and there's just pure numbers with it. If you've got two people, there's one relationship. If there's three people, there's three. 5, suddenly there's 10. 10, suddenly there's 45. 25 people, it's 300. 100, it's suddenly 4,950. It becomes very complicated very quickly. So if you're managing a team, don't expect it to be easy. It's not going to be easy. It's difficult relationships. And I would hazard a guess, actually, that your most painful experiences in life have been about relationships, possibly about a personal health thing. but it's really about relationships where we get the most difficulty. We find them, things go wrong. We don't understand why the other person, other people have behaved like they have. It's a difficult thing to do. And so managing teams is difficult, but it is possible to build happy teams. And another thing possibly to realize is that there's this concept called mentalizing, which I don't think is well known, but we can only keep 4 other people in mind at any one time. If you think about it, when you're at a sort of party and you're talking with 2 or 3 people, if another 2 people join, very quickly the conversation moves into 2. And that's because we just can't really hold all those people's ideas. Shakespeare was extraordinarily aware of this. He never has a dialogue with more than 4 people in it. And in fact, if those people are talking about another person, it's only 3 people, because you're having to imagine the person they're talking about. So this is a very hard limit on how we can deal with complexity in our relationships. So if you're running team meetings or you're running brainstorming sessions, try and split out into groups of 4 or 5 quite regularly in it, because it will help people get more creative, because they can actually hold what other people are thinking about when it's that small. So this idea of managing teams is very fruitful. That's why human beings are so successful as a species, because we can manage the complexity of relationships, but it is hard. And that's just life. So that's just a starting place, that it's not an easy thing to do, but building happy teams is really worth it. It's where the magic happens, and it's where the money is actually. And I can show you evidence of that. So I'm going to show you evidence about how happiness leads to success. So we very regularly think that success leads to happiness, but we don't often think about how happiness leads to success. So I'm going to show you evidence on retention, productivity, and creativity. And the extraordinary thing about happiness and happy teams is that it is a forward-looking indicator. It's predictive of how the future is, and I'll show you that. So for retention, so we work with clients. We've worked with clients for some time now, although Friday Pulse was only launched in 2019. One of the clients, the biggest clients that we worked longest with before that, with previous products, was Travelex, who you probably all know from airport exchange booths. They actually went into receivership at the beginning of COVID, not really to do with COVID partly, but they also had this huge hack. But we worked with them for 4 years. And so we went back over their data, and we looked at, we were measuring them monthly. Friday Pulse is a weekly tool, most of you will know, but we were looking at them monthly because we were working with an old product we used to use. And we were measuring them, and we could basically parcel the data so that we looked at, in Q1, particularly months 1 and 2, we looked at how happy people were. And then we looked in Q2, whether they left, literally whether they left the organization or not. So we've basically got a predictive indicator from Q1 and actually looking at the evidence about whether they left or not. And this is what we found, which is that the very unhappy were twice as likely to leave as the happy. And that's a big, big difference. So Travelex was a fast turnover business. They had 14, about 8% churn every month of their employees. Particularly had a lot of people in those sort of booths in airports. It's maybe not the most aspirational job, and so being unhappy meant that people jumped very quickly. I'd also point out that when people were not responding to our surveys, they basically were disengaged, and that basically if we didn't have responses from people, their behavior was pretty much the same as if they'd said they were unhappy. So happiness is a predictive indicator, which is predicting staff turnover. And of course, with all the pressure on people at the moment, with supposedly the Great Resignation happening and things like that, happiness is one of the reasons we leave. Unhappiness is one of the reasons we leave a job. So retention. We can also look at data on productivity, or I'm going to particularly do it on sales here. And I really like this study. I'm not sure if I put the reference at the bottom, but it's by Professor Emmanuel Deneve. He's at the Oxford University. It's the best design survey I've seen on looking at the relationship between mood, weekly mood, happiness, and productivity, in this case, sales. And it is in BT call operators. It's 11 BT call centers across the UK, 1,750 operators they had in the survey. And these operators, and the reason why the study is so good is the data on sales is very individually based. And they had 90% inbound calls, which meant that the relationship between sales and productivity was literally, they didn't have any autonomy to go prospecting or anything like that. They just received the calls. So we're just talking about a pure effect of how their relationship with the caller was. They measured happiness weekly. What was their mood? And what they showed was that the happier operators made 13% more sales than average. 13%. There's very little autonomy in this job, and yet there's still a large effect of happiness on the actual sales. And they went underneath that to look about what was going on. And they saw that the happier operators, they fulfilled their schedules more completely. So they sort of adhered to what they were trying to do. They worked faster, they did more calls, and they made better quality calls with them. It was actually the better quality calls that really linked to the sales rather than working faster. It was the quality of their calls. And what they displayed was enhanced social and negotiation skills. And they're more likely to be focused. I mean, we've all run up call centers and we've had people who are great and people that weren't. And when people are great on the phone, it makes the experience a lot better. And of course, we're more likely to buy. And they're also dealing sometimes it's very easy. They're just like someone's just ringing to pay. Sometimes it's a complex upsell, or a customer's come in unhappy and they're trying to sort it out and create a sale out of that. So they need those more socially and emotionally intelligent ways of connecting with people. They had higher customer satisfaction ratings, the happier ones. And they also showed that operators who became happier, i.e. they weren't particularly happy the week before, they became happier the second week they sold more than the first week. So there was in-person effects as well going on. This is very, very strong evidence because it's such a constrained environment. You know, normally when we're looking at teams, it might be quite hard to measure productivity, might be quite hard to know what's down to one person rather than another. This is very clearly one person could really track their mood with it. And it's a large effect in a very narrow way. We normally find that if the jobs are more creative, that there's much more ambiguity in how something can be done. That happiness has an even larger effect because you're into those social and negotiating skills that go on. When people are feeling in a better mood, effectively, they can do those things more effectively. So happiness and productivity is linked. The third one I want to show you is creativity, which is again getting into these sort of softer, sometimes, well, definitely harder to measure skills. So, you know, creativity, how do we measure it? Well, I'm going to take an example where people basically were using a lateral problem solving task in order to see how people did with it. So this is called the Dunker Candle experiment. If any of you did psychology at university, you might know about this experiment. But basically, it's a sort of mind mess thing where they give you a book of matches, a box of tacks, and a candle. And they say, can you attach the candle to the wall in such a way that when you light it, the wax doesn't drip on the floor? And what you have to realize is that you've also got a box. So what you can do is empty the tacks and tack the box to the wall, put the candle in it, light it, and it all works. That's the solution they're looking for. Occasionally people come up with quite random other solutions, but you're looking for lateral problem solving things. And what they did was they manipulated people in this experiment into different moods. So firstly, they had a control group where they didn't do anything to them. They basically were just looking at how they did. And what they found was the control group that 13% of people solved the problem in the length of time they were doing it. I think it was 5 minutes. They put one group into a negative mood. They'd have done something like shown a video of, you know, something horrible happening, you know, or discordant music, or maybe a baby screaming. That makes us quite anxious. The positive group, there might be a baby gurgling or some very beautiful music or something lovely happening. They've moved the moods around. So they put it in a negative mood, and how many people of those solved it? Well, very interestingly, 20% more did. And in a sense, when we are in experiencing a so-called negative emotion, they're not dysfunctional. There's functionality to things like anger and sadness and fear. You know, anger helps us respond to, they help us respond to threats. you know, and so we have energy to do things. So maybe there's being energized, and maybe this is why management by fear works to a degree, in the sense that it motivates people to avoid, you know, the threat. But when you put people in a positive mood, 75% of them solved it. And that's because, particularly with creativity and lateral problem solving, is that when we're in a good mood, we see the bigger picture much more. We see how things connect together. And so they were able to sort of imagine different ways of doing things. And if we think about how important that is in our teams, then this is a really critical thing for you, you know, if you're a team leader or you run multiple teams or you oversee multiple teams, that, you know, this is an important thing to do. And having teams in a positive state of mind is going to really, really help with innovation and creativity in that way. There is lots more evidence about what happiness can do, but I'll just summarize them here. So retention, more than twice as likely to stay. Productivity, an estimate is about 28% more productive, happier teams to unhappy teams. Alex Edmonds from London Business School has also got evidence that you get higher share price from organizations with good cultures. The innovations to the right. And then this one here, which I think is of interest to all of us that work in teams and or manage teams or lead teams, is that there's less stress and conflict, and none of us likes conflict. So, you know, one of the paybacks for a team lead about running a happy team is that you'll have less problems to solve, less problems to sort out, you know, less people problems to sort out. And that's just good for your stress as much as anything else. And of course, actually, if you manage to run a team that is happy, content, they're going to really love you as a line manager. So it's just really rewarding for us to run a good team. So the soft stuff is the hard stuff, but it's worth it. And it's worth trying to do this, and it's worth the effort to do it. And now I want to talk a little bit about measurement and my preferred way of measuring. There are different ways of measurement. And if anyone in the Q&A wants to ask me more detail, I'm a measurement geek. You can ask me what you like. But I want to illustrate why I particularly like the way that we measure it at Friday Pulse, and to use the pandemic as the example. So the pandemic has clearly had an impact on us all. You know, we've seen data on waves of, you know, infections and cases and hospitalizations and even deaths, right? But I shouldn't think many of you have seen the waves and the impacts on people's happiness, their well-being. The data is there, but it's not very widely shared. And in fact, I didn't even know about it in the first year of the pandemic until I saw this graph come out in the World Happiness Report in 2021. It was tucked away in chapter 7, and it was basically looking at the impact of the pandemic on UK workers' weekly happiness. Now, there's different types of workers here. It's not really very important, but what you can basically see is sort of an inverse of the wave of cases. You know, in March 2020, there's a huge drop in happiness. There's a rise through the summer. That was the eat out to help out time if you're British. And then we had a drop in the autumn again, as we started to get more restrictions come back again. Now, this data actually comes from YouGov, and they have a weekly survey called the Weekly Mood of the Nation. And what I've done in the next graph is this is the sort of question they're asking: how happy were you this week? This is the question we use: how happy were you at work this week? So we're trying to capture in a single good, bad sort of indicator what people's overall feeling is. And when people use this, they can indicate whether they feel better this week than last, whether they feel the same, whether they feel worse. And that's what you're trying to really pick up in it, a simple indicator about it. It's strictly speaking called episodal measurement. You're looking at the end of an episode and you're looking back how it is. So this is the YouGov data plotted out. So this is exactly the same data. That's the drop in March 2020. Sorry about the scale at the bottom, just noticed that's gone wrong. This is the eat out to help out. This is the drop. This is Christmas of 2021. So although we were locked down, it's a bit happier. And then you can see the data going. That was January, February, which was really hard when we were locked down in the winter that time. And what this really shows is that happiness is kind of a wave. It goes up and down. I think that's all of our experience. You know, we don't feel happy all the time. In fact, possibly it would be dysfunctional to be happy all the time. You know, there's things to learn from when we're unhappy. So if we measure weekly, we give people the opportunity to indicate whether they've had a good or bad week. And as I said, you know, you can have 2 or 3 moods in a day, in a morning. And indeed, you can have longer phases. You know, I'm old enough to have had good and bad decades by now. So there's sort of almost different wavelengths of what we're talking about. But this weekly wave really picks up what's going on. Now, we can overlay Friday Pulse clients over this because we were asking very similar question. I've had to rebase them to both to 100. So basically 100 was what the pre-COVID average for both us and for the UK. And what we noticed is that our clients had the same dip. It wasn't quite as deep. They recovered back beforehand, but still jumping around. But they didn't have these second and third dips. They still had the peak for Christmas. They didn't have these second and third dips. And by thinking about their employees' happiness every week, I think they were able to keep, you know, the wolf at the door, keep the pandemic at the door more, and basically help people to be focused at work on what was going on. So there's really quite a big difference that goes on there. Now, that's great, and it shows resilience, and resilience really is 2 things. Resilience is the ability to bounce back after a shock, and it's the ability to absorb a shock, which is what's going on here. That's really, really helpful. Happier teams most certainly are resilient. But what I also want you to know is you couldn't see this if you weren't using weekly episodal measurement. If you're just doing an annual survey, you know, you might have a survey here, and then you might have another survey over here, but you wouldn't see all the difference in between. You wouldn't have the early warning about what's going on. And as I'll talk about in a bit, I really like to think of data as a feedback loop that basically it's helping us make better decisions by having the data in real time. So, so that question is really, that's just, actually the YouGov data is happy or not, but ours is a little bit more nuanced. But that picks up that signal and does an extraordinary amount of work in just one question. And it's taken me a long time to find that statistical simplicity. You know, when I started out doing surveys about happiness at work, I'd ask about 80 questions. And but now asking this person repeatedly really picks up the signal. But we also sometimes want to know more about the in-depth. So there's a time and a space also for deeper drivers about what's going on. And it's a different survey methodology where you ask more questions around it. So we do that in Friday Pulse by asking a quarterly, we call it a culture profile. We're basically looking at the drivers of happiness at work. And from my work, basically a lot of population surveys over the last 10 years, these are the 5 big factors that teams need to do to sort of build happier teams, which is that they build relationships, which we call connect. We frame them as positive actions that you can take as you do it. So so connect. The second is to be fair, which is that happiness, positivity is very social. It's very connected, as I said. And if there isn't fairness in the system, there isn't work-life balance is about respect of your life outside, appreciation is about the connection between people. If there isn't fairness in the system, then people don't even get into the space of being happy. When people feel it's unfair, that's an anger trigger. Anger is a response to an injustice, partly. Empower is that when we can shape our work and be ourselves, then we feel much better. Challenge is about stretch is really good for us. It's a misunderstanding to think that people would be happy doing nothing. In fact, boredom is a bigger driver of unhappiness at work than stress is. You know, being bored is terrible. So challenge is great. And then the final one is to inspire, which is basically to feel what we do is worthwhile and meaningful. Now, this isn't exactly new science. You know, if you look at those last 3, Empower, Challenge, Inspire, you can see Daniel Pink's drive. He talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. He himself basically worked on self-determination theory and stretched that out a bit, which was about relatedness, autonomy, and competence. You can see Martin Seligman, if you happen to like positive psychology. You can see Maslow in there, fairness, connect, empower, challenge, inspire going up there. But what we do is we frame it in these positive actions, so it's easy to understand and easy to act on. We always try, everything we're doing at Friday Pulse, to lean into actions that you can take. You know, I am a statistician. I do like decimal places, but we're here to create positive change. So we try and frame things in ways which are really helpful and easy to understand. So we do these sort of questions. Now, if you are not a client of ours, we've got a mixture of people on who work in clients that use us, but if you've never used any of our tools, then you can go to Friday1 .com, which links to a 5-minute test that will use those 5 ways and give you a report, so you can understand what I mean about that way of measuring it. And the idea is it gives you some tips about how to be happier at work. So the soft stuff is the hard stuff. It's worth it. The pandemic hurts, then the measurement things. And I can see 3 questions. Angela, should I look at those, or should we leave them to the end?
There's a couple of questions in there that you might want to have a look at and respond to.
How do we measure levels of stress? So stress is, well, you can do, and we often used to, with clients, ask, you know, how stressed were you this month? And what I found was, with that, if you ask people about stress, people can give you an answer. And basically it's a 5-point scale like everything else. So if you say you're very stressed, that's poor, and you're not at all stressed, you're right over here, that's good. Only if you said you were very stressed did it start to affect things like retention or productivity. And whereas happiness, you had the gradient that we saw with it. So in other words, the stress data was basically held in people saying they were very unhappy. It didn't add much extra variance. It can be useful internally because that's how people want to do it. Certainly in the public sector, they like talking about stress. So occasionally some of our clients use it in their quarterly surveys to do it. That's basically how I do it. I ask people how stressed they are. You can go, there's a whole cottage industry of stress audits that you can use as well. The thing with stress is when people aren't stressed, they're not necessarily happy. If they're very stressed, they're going to be unhappy anyway. So basically, it doesn't have such an impact itself. How do Friday Pulse clients keep their staff happier than non? I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So we'll come to that in a minute. So I'll do that. The role of meditation and its effects on the prefrontal cortex. There are certainly studies that show that long-term meditators, particularly Buddhist monks, it does have an impact on certain parts of the brain. I would have to reread the research to know whether that's the prefrontal cortex. It must be what exactly it is. I was talking very much about relationships, and then meditation is very good at calming us, which probably does improve our relationships. So Richard Davidson is the person that's done a lot of research on this, but there definitely is a positive impact from being mindful, being reflective, on people's happiness going there. There's another one in here from Pam. How do you get around the challenge from clients that we shouldn't just recruit happier people? Wouldn't that be easier? I think that recruiting people who are more positive is a very rational thing for individual clients to do. Doesn't solve a situation at a societal level, but it does. But we are very shaped by our environments. So, I am a pretty positive, happy person, but if you put me into a toxic environment, I'll be drained very quickly. So that will not solve very much in the end, because if you put happy people into bad environments, the bad environment wins every time. If you're looking for a job, I would definitely think about how happy the team you're going into, and the individuals. We do find individuals. Some people we feel very positive around. Some people we feel very negative around. That does have an impact on our mood. So there are ways about that doing. But I'm very interested in the team, because I think the team is really the engine of change, in the sense that as I say, we're shaped by environment. And a team, if you lead a team well, or you have a really highly functioning team, everyone rises together. So it's a much more effective intervention. And in fact, it would be a critique of what I think a lot of well-being and happiness interventions are is that they're too individually focused. I think they should be more socially, as you know, as I started with there, that, you know, the Robin Dunbar talks about relationships. He's written a book called Friends, but that is what makes us human. That's why we come together for business, because we work better together than we would individually. And so it's that, those relationships, and happiness is almost a social emotion. So we, you know, laughter, we laugh about 30 times more with people than we do on our own, but we also feel more sort of joy in the company of others. We can feel contentment on our own and reflexy, but those positive collaborative emotions are more experienced in a group. Great, I'll just shut the Q&A bit down again, and I'll go to, you can build happy teams. I've realized I haven't got a clock showing, so I hope I'm okay for time, Angela, but you can shout if I'm not.
About halfway through, Nick.
Okay, I'm 2/3 of the way through what I was going to talk about. So the first thing I want to say is building a happier team really is possible. And this is real data from one people manager using our free team at Friday, okay? The only thing I've done is I've scrunched this data, 6 months of data into the field. This field normally shows 3 months. So where he apparently was recruited to, you know, turn around a team, they were unhappy, scoring 46. So when we make our indicators 0 to 100, that basically if you said you're very unhappy, you're going to get 0. If you said you're very happy, you're going to get 100, and in between. So there's a team here that are basically saying more of them are unhappy than are even okay. He has come and they've jiggled around. That was the Christmas break, not recording. And then they've got up into the right zone up here, which is sort of between 65 and 80. You know, those are good scores there. You know, some weeks it's a little bit worse. You want to know that so you can set it back. But he's really turned around this team, and he's added, you know, 40, 25 points, full up a whole notch. Everyone responding each week, 1 notch up from what before he joined the team. And it shows really, it's not something that happens immediately, but you absolutely can intervene and move to, and create happier teams. And that is the goal, to have teams that are functional, positive, where they can collaborate and rely on each other. Doesn't mean that it's still not going to have bad weeks. You know, things go wrong. There are setbacks. How you quickly respond to those becomes the shape of the curve, becomes the resilience. So it's really possible. And so I want to talk about putting it into action. And, you know, I am a statistician, and Friday Pulse has a statistical element to its tool, but it also has a process element. But really that is about creating what I call data feedback loops, and how you can use that data to influence how you talk to your team, how you talk with your team, how the whole organization thinks about this. So this is really in homage to the great Daniel Kahneman, but I call this, he had this book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and he talked about being intuitive, the system 1, and analytical system 2, and we use system 1 all the time. And so I talk about feeling fast and thinking slow. And the feeling fast feedback loop is a weekly one. So this is basically using that weekly data and being on top of your team's experience each week, not leaving it to once a quarter, once a year, but every week having a little measure, very light, meet, talk together. So it's a measure, meet, act feedback loop, and it's got the hair there because it's the fast one, and it's weekly, and Friday Pulse supports this. And it supports it not only by measuring, but by feeding that back. That's just showing until you get the measurement, you'll see how you're doing each week. But you also every week get a presentation mode. Basically, I think of it as a bit like HelloFresh, that, you know, if you've ever used HelloFresh or one of those box deliveries where you basically get 3 meals in the box, and you've got the menu, the recipe, and the ingredients, the recipe and the ingredients. So what we do is really create a recipe for a team meeting, and we say, you know, what you really need to talk about is what's gone well in your team, you know, how much they feel they're supported by each other. You need to tackle what hasn't gone well, what their frustrations. And so we build that in. So basically people can put into Friday Pulse like what's gone well for them this week. They want to thank anyone, they can thank them. And basically what you're trying to do is make a bit of a bias actually towards the positive. It's very, very easy in a fast moving world to only look out for danger signals, but to skip straight over the things that have gone well, go straight to the next challenge. that is short-sighted. It is much better, and this is not a weakness of us as humans, this is just who we are. All of us like to be appreciated, and actually we like appreciating and thanking other people. And so in the tool, we really build this in so that we're trying to build that network of positivity between all of those relationships in a team. So it's a really critical part. And in fact, it's kind of where I think, part of the magic emerges if you get those weekly team meetings going. In fact, I should have put a graph in here, but, I've got hard data which shows that teams that meet weekly, meet regularly, are happier than teams that don't meet. So that's some population surveys, but so it's a really important part that you actually do it, and asking questions. If you're a team leader, it's a lot about asking questions and listening to the answers. So Friday Pulse helps you do that in a systematic way. It asks people how happy they were, what to share. You can obviously do this offline, and good team leaders naturally do this, and it's a skill, and it's an important, if you like, happiness habit to get into, having good weekly meetings and listening to responses. And then we also do a thinking slow, a more analytical one. So this is using the 5 ways, where we use that deeper data, we analyze it a bit more, and we help you maybe make a plan about what you need to do. It might be that your team, we create an impact report in Friday Pulse, but it might be that your team needs to think more about how you give each other feedback, and we have help center articles and things in there to help you think about that. But it's basically rising to the surface. What are the challenges for your team or for the whole organization? Nearly every bit of our data is analyzed, is shown at the team level and the organizational level and across teams. If you're an admin and you're looking after, or a senior leader looking after many people, you can see across the teams as well. And so this data is really going to help you think about the 5 ways, how they're doing in your organization, where your challenges are. It will start providing overview maps. If you've got the right sort of security rights to have a look across all the teams, you'd see them all across those. You'd see which ones are the most important, comparing to benchmark. And so this analytical tools is really going to help people that manage multiple teams. So we have the free version of Friday Pulse, which is just for single teams, but then there's these features that when you bring them together, you start getting more value with them, and of course becomes paid for. So if you get this right, this combination between the weekly, the sort of feeling fast, keeping on top of things, in a way that meeting's a bit like a tech team would run a retrospective. It's basically dealing with the friction, encouraging the flow. It's about friction and flow. So that's going to help it. And then you're going to have those analytical ones. But I started thinking about this as like the loops inside each other. So if you are a team wanting to change, but you're in an organization that doesn't, and you're that little hair and the organization isn't moving, you start trying to climb up the inside of the loop. It's very hard work. If you're a team that isn't feeling like changing the direction the organization is, and the organization is moving forward, you get a bit discombobulated and thrown out the back. But you get them aligned. It's kind of like walking on a travelator at Heathrow Airport, where you're walking on and you get on the travelator and everything moves fast. You get that alignment, and then that's where the magic happens, where everything starts really working together all the way. So Friday Pulse, we attempt to be a holistic platform. We've got the weekly check-in, the quarterly thing, and the analytics that come out of the relationship between the two, actually. And we really try and be for the whole business. So we're really trying to, we don't necessarily think of work as our biggest source of happiness in life, but you don't really want to go to work and be miserable. And so happiness is an attractive proposition to employees. Who doesn't want to be happy at work? For the organization, there's all that business case there, There is a win-win here, absolutely, certainly. It is a tangential thing to think about the happiness of employees. So I think one of the reasons why people talk about engagement so much is that that's a very clear business goal, engagement. It's basically a code word for productivity, engagement. So happiness actually goes the other way. It says if you help people be happier, then you'll get all of those goals coming out of it. And then we're good for team leaders. And team leaders, as I said, it's difficult managing people. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. It's much easier to count widgets and make widgets be more efficient, or, that's much easier. The difficult thing is our emotional relationships. That's the hardest thing. And I think that as a nation, we underinvest in people, leaders, people skills. And actually what Friday Pulse, my big vision for it really is, or my big hope, is that we make team leaders work more joyful, more effective, less stressful. By having this data every week, you notice if something's going wrong quickly so you can fix it. And our grandmothers were right, a stitch in time does save 9. So, and things which are not talked about fester and rot. So if you're a team leader, it does require a little bravery. And there is some, if you want your team to be autonomous, you have to sort of give up some autonomy yourself. So it's not without difficulties, it's not without challenges. But if you want to be a team leader that's respected, and dare even say loved by your team, then I think having meetings very regularly, talking to people very regularly, listening is a great way, and Friday Pulse can help with that. We have different pricing packages. So if you're coming in and you're not known us before, we have a free team. We have a essential product and an expert one. You can go there, book demos, or just get started. If you want more brain food, there's white papers on our website. So there's a happiness KPI one, which is a bit more measurement focused, and there's a 5 ways to happiness work, which is a bit more about how the 5 ways are and where the evidence for them is. So that was happiness, serious business. So the soft stuff is the hard stuff. If you're finding managing people difficult, it's not that's not unexpected. It's the most complex thing that we do, managing relationships. You're managing a network of relationships, which is harder than just individual relationships. It is worth it. There's a strong business case for it, and it will cause you less stress. Measurement, particularly weekly, picks up things very quickly, feeds it back to you. And it is possible to turn around teams from unhappy to happy. People do it. It takes patience and persistence and listening, but it's absolutely possible. So that's the slides for it. And we have time for questions. I can stop sharing and yeah.
Thanks so much, Nic. And hopefully we've answered Marjorie's question. You've answered Marjorie's question in there with the different bits. Marjorie, let us know if you still had further questions on that. And I think just some love coming in from the Mohammed Mind Body Soul Connection.
Can you maybe share an example of how a weekly feedback session with the team should be, and how do you get the team to open up? So we're really talking there about how do you build psychological safety in the sense that a weekly one. So the way that Friday works is that we start by talking about what's gone well this week. And if you think about that creativity data I was talking about, that when people are in a good mood, they're more creative, more innovative. They're also more trusting and all sorts of other things. So, so we start with what's gone well for people. And then from there, you can then look at the frustrations. If we had started the meeting with what are your frustrations, you'd have a very different team meeting. And the way it works, so, like that team leader who turned around his team, is listening and patience and acting on it. The first feedback loop is measure, meet, act. If you don't act on the feedback, then very quickly people are going to get bored of giving it you. That's not in their self-interest. So really the way that the Friday Pulse works is by trying to be in the self-interest of everybody. So if people start to share frustrations, that should almost be celebrated, in the sense that people are starting to honor you with talking about what's not going right for them. So we do sometimes find with clients that they start off a little happier and then they drop a bit. And that, again, I think is about people actually trusting the system and saying, oh, I can say that I haven't had a great week here. That won't look bad. I mean, actually people's individual answers are anonymous when they score, when they use a score thing. When they give feedback, written feedback, it's named quite deliberately, consciously, that that if you don't name feedback, people can get a little negative and trolly and aren't taking responsibility. So we're a tool for improving conversations. So it would be really undermining of a team if is your name Barry or Henderson? Anyway, Henderson Barry, which sounds a very fine name. You know, if they just started saying, you know, oh, I don't like Henderson Barry, and they didn't put the name to it, it would do you no good. It'd just be, and it wouldn't do anyone any good. Whereas if they actually dared to say, oh, I didn't like it when you did this, that's something you can work with. So, so naming in that way. So really, a weekly team meeting is about creating a safe environment for people to share, and you do that by listening and respecting them, and looking about how you can work together when to fix some problems. Sometimes problems are hard to fix. Do people find hesitant to name frustrations because it isn't anonymous? It's a fair question, Hilary, and something we thought about quite a lot. I think that if you want to have that sort of alerts things where people are reporting things which are very difficult, Friday Pulse isn't the tool for you. We're a tool to build positivity. And so actually people, I think that probably some people don't name their frustrations because they aren't anonymous. I'm hoping they're scoring that they're unhappy then, so that if a team is unhappy but not giving any sort of negative feedback or frustrations, it's worth stopping at that moment in the team meeting live and going, okay, so you know what has blocked people this week. So you know, Friday Pulse isn't going to necessarily raise everything. It creates a structure where they can be raised. In some ways, if the frustration is written at all or it isn't, is really almost irrelevant. It's, are you on top of those things? So if in your team people are stuck, you know, maybe you see somebody, you're the team leader and you're having your team meeting on Zoom or in person, and you just notice that one of your team's more stuck, then talk to them after the meeting. Maybe it's difficult for them to bring it up. Maybe it's an interpersonal thing in the team, which is embarrassing to bring up, but go and have a one-to-one with them and actually just ask them. So, you know, the team meeting won't solve everything, but it's a vehicle to which those things can start coming, that the team can start building that. And you should be having very regular one-to-ones. You know, I don't mean formal one-to-ones. I mean, just sitting down and having a coffee with somebody, going for a walk with them, picking up that other thing. I sometimes say feelings are data. So, you know, you can put them numerically, but, you know, how your team are feeling is data about how the team is working together, and being sensitive to that and open to that will help you build a happier team.
Great, thank you. And we had an external question come through, Nick. So I've popped it in the chat to you. Our team seems to be in a downward spiral of unhappiness, not meeting targets. So we're getting unhappier and unhappier. What can we do?
It kind of depends what the source of that unhappiness is. So it might be your internal relationships, or it might be over ambitious external targets. It might be the market. A resilient team that has strong relationships can go through the fire together sort of better than a team which doesn't have strong relationships between it. So if you're going in a spiral, getting unhappy and unhappier, I would imagine that the one-to-ones relationships, whether that's with the team lead to you or between a relationship, are getting undermined, and I would talk more to each other and listen more to each other. I mean, relationships are what really helps us get through difficult patches. There's not a human being that doesn't have pain and doesn't have difficult times, and it's supporting each other. So that sounds to me a team where they haven't got each other's back and they're not supporting each other, and doesn't sound a good situation.
Yeah, difficult one. And there's just one final question to end on, probably, from Mohammed in there.
Just a small one. What's the definition
Yes.
of happiness? So I think of happiness as a gateway word to a whole range of positive emotions. And if you ask people what is happiness, I mean, you know, you could actually type in there or in the chat, any of you that are still there, you know, what do you think happiness is for you? And we probably get a variety of answers. You know, I would imagine that some of you will start talking about contentment. Some of you might start talking about joy, and contentment and joy are quite different emotions. Contentment is a very quiet emotion. Joy is a very busy emotion, elevating one. So I think of happiness as that whole spectrum. It has different sort of energies. So we have, as I said, you know, contentment, peace, serenity are ones which are quite quiet and on your own. Joy, enthusiasm, awe is sort of wonder about reaching even more. But then we can have ones which are quite, you know, like curiosity and interest. They're sort of good emotions. We can have ones which are about relationships, you know, so laughter, love, affection, about relationships. So it's capturing that whole space, and actually that's why I like the 5 ways, because they're really opening up that whole agile, complicated space of positive emotions. And in a way, we want to have those at different times. So so sometimes in our team we want people to be having a laugh, but not, you know, other times we want them to be on their own, being very interested. So it's really this sort of variety of it. And I can see, you can say if the definition varies, how can you ensure happiness? Well, that's the point, is that everybody can answer that question, whether I was happy or not. It doesn't really matter for them what their definition of happiness is, as long as they have their own consistent definition of it, and it's getting better or worse for them. So there is variety, and there's variety of personalities, there's varieties of different roles and tasks, and not all of your happiness will be met at work. You know, there's some bits which are not about work, and there's, you know, but if people are happy at work in that sort of cognitive judgment reflection, it's good for me, then that is good. And I actually think that defining it too much creates a mess. It's almost better to have it slightly undefined, because this is the conversation that's more important. And the data is reliable. The data is reliable on that sort of 5-point scale. If people say they're okay one week and they're happier the next week, they are happier. You know, that is for them. So in that way, that simplicity of that answer is easier. And it's why I don't use things like affect balances, where you ask people about lots of different emotions, because actually humans are not very good at differentiating between emotions anyway. So it's you know, it's actually in that simplicity, the good bad signal is the best way to do it. And read happiness KPI for more information on that. But and if you read the 5 ways, I talk a little bit there about the positive emotions in there too. So yeah. Carolina, psychometric properties of my quarterly questions. So basically, if you are someone that is a stato Carolina, then Carolina, anyway, then yeah, so you will know that when you're creating a questionnaire, there is a tension between getting a breadth underneath the core construct, and also have it talking about the same thing. So we use the 5 ways as a sort of bridge. So there's the connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire, 3 questions under each. So 3 questions is the shortest scale you can have. I can't remember the Cronenberg alphas absolutely off my head, but I do have them. They're all strong to very strong as holding together the 3 questions. And the whole questionnaire holds together pretty well. So basically the methodology we started with is I started with 108 questions on happiness. And if you statistically have an outcome, so you know you want to have more happier weeks or more happiness at work, and you've got the drivers, you can obviously look at the correlation coefficients and how they load onto that. We used a lot of factor structure stuff in there too. So were there some things you thought will fit in some of the categories but didn't end up with other questions? There certainly are things that are different around the world, by the way. So when I've done surveys in Latin America, physical safety at work becomes more important, things like that. In a way, we have legislated our way out of that. Most people feel very safe at work physically. So whereas in the developing world, that might be more problems. So there are different things that could do. Yeah. It's always a choice, very hard choice when you come to which is the 13th, 14th, and 15th question, which is why you use the methodology of having the 5 ways to to hold that. And indeed would be my critique, by the way, of the Gallup Q12, in that because they don't have an outcome measure, it's very hard to know what the impacts of the different 12 questions are and the balances of those. With ours, we create something called an impact report for you. So we will actually identify for you, each team, which is the one that's could most drive improvements in happiness. If you haven't got an outcome measure, you can't do that. So I mean, I find it very hard to understand, how Gallup can differentiate between whether having a best friend at work or having feedback. How do you weigh them? Because they don't talk about what their outcome is. And you can't ask people how engaged are you at work, because they don't understand the question. So engagement, I think, is a little bit of a difficult topic. I think happiness is much more connecting with people and creates a much better psychological contract between you and the employee. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nic. And thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to share a recording of this webinar with everyone who's registered probably tomorrow. So you'll get that in your inboxes, and you can share it around with colleagues as well if you need to. And you can always get in touch with us at hello@fridaypulse.com if you have follow-up questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.